It's open to abuse, Steadicam, and one of the roles of the operator, the Steadicam operator, is to be the arbiter of taste with using the Steadicam, and how you use it, is almost, a sort of, don't just put it on and wang the thing around to create false interest in something. I mean, if you look at all of the great Steadicam shots, the classics, the Goodfellas, Snake Eyes. Now there's so many of really good shots, whereas before that's what I was learning from, a lot of Larry McConkey's shots. There's always something of interest going on in the shot that, carries the audience along, drives the audience along, that gives them that kind of experience of something new that, they're seeing. It's actually quite hard to do. And it takes a good director and a good DOP and operator to come up with something that, holds the audience's attention, the point of interest all the way through. I'd like to think that a lot of the shots that were successful, the audience didn't really sort of realize it was a Steadicam at work. Oddly enough, it's just a kind of a shot continuum that is memorable at the end. My best work, the most satisfying for me, was on Anna Karenina, as I mentioned. It was an appropriate use of the Steadicam. Interestingly, on Anna Karenina, we didn't just use the Steadicam body mounted. There's so many shots in that movie that are on a dolly with the Steadicam moving around the set. Because the set was a wooden floor, to lay a dance floor for a dolly to move around such a huge space would have taken too much time in the day, but just mounting the Steadicam directly onto the dolly and being pushed around the set, the Steadicam created the stabilization on top of the dolly, so that when we went over all the bumpy floors, the Steadicam was evening that out. But it allowed me, because I wasn't working with the physical problems of carrying the Steadicam, to just concentrate on the operating, sitting on the dolly. You can do so many things with the Steadicam. You can hard mount it onto different devices, dollies, rickshaws, tracking vehicles, and not just sort of on the body. I'd like people to look at that film and find it difficult to work out what was dolly, what was crane, what was Steadicam.
I mean, the best camera work is the one that you don't see, is it? Because you're concentrating on the story. If you're too aware of what the camera is doing, then it didn't work, did it?
It's funny because the Atonement shot does divide opinions. It's kind of gone down in the annals of Steadicam history as one of the great achievements of Steadicam, but there are a lot of people who don't actually like it and find it quite indulgent. It's a sort of a trophy shot almost. It creates an interesting debate over what is good and bad Steadicam, and what is good shot conception and what is an indulgent trophy shot in a movie. Certainly, if somebody says what's the hardest shot you've ever had to do, I would say, well, it's definitely the Atonement from a physical point of view. We were on a tracking vehicle to start with, so I had to step off a tracking vehicle, then walk on quite heavy sand, and then up ramps. Anybody who's carried a Steadicam over sand and on ramps will know that you get to a point where your legs just won't carry you anymore, I sat on a rickshaw for the last part of the run. Not only was the shot physically demanding, there were transitions, and obviously when you transition from sitting on an electric vehicle that's going over sand as well, the main thing is that sitting with a Steadicam with your vest is making sure that when you do step off, your legs haven't gone to sleep. Whilst coping with that, you're trying to keep a shot moving. And if at any one point you kind of falter in your movement and fail to keep the camera moving, the shot's dead. So you have to go back to the beginning again, which is actually what happened on take 6, which we went to take 6, and I just couldn't get round the course. My legs just wouldn't carry me up the steps on the bandstand sequence. So if that shot was done first shot of the movie on the first day or the first week of the shooting, it would have been a lot easier physically, but it wasn't. It was almost at the end of the shoot. And we rehearsed with the camera 4 or 5 times before we actually shot it on that day. For me, in terms of, yes, there were only 4 usable takes, but I'd been round the course with the camera about 10 times. I've done so many shots over my career that were longer than 5 minutes. Early in my career, did rock concerts on film cameras and wore the Steadicam for an hour and a half. They're not continuous takes, those. They're takes where you can also physically rest with the camera, wearing the camera and stuff. And also, you're working a much smaller space, whereas the Atonement shot was like nearly 1/4 mile. You know, my first reaction was when Seamus said to me, "Oh, we're going to do this scene as a 1-take Steadicam take." And I said, "No way. I mean, there's no way you can do that distance as 1 take and incorporate all the action points that Joe wanted to include." I had to think about it, and it was just my experience that thought, could I do part of it on an electric cart? Could I step off? Yes, I think we could. And that would save all that energy walking backwards across the heaviest bit of sand. How do we do the last bit? Because the last bit would have been walking backwards, and we had these tanks with guns that were very low, you know, and so they were angled over the walkway where we had to go, which meant I would have had to duck down. And the method for travelling through that part of the shot was going backwards, carrying the Steadicam. But at the end of a shot, when it's physically, you're really getting to, you know, drop off point of being able to carry the rig, to crouch and go backwards with the rig would have been too much. So that sort of led me to think, could we go on a rickshaw? In which case I can sit onto the rickshaw and get pulled backwards, keeping my head and my body lower than the actual rig. That was something that experience brought on, something I wouldn't have been able to do at the beginning of my career. Anyone who uses the Steadicam knows that the actual Steadicam arm is one of the genius sides of the design, the original design that Garrett came up with, because the actual arm on which the sled and camera are suspended on allows you to keep that camera moving when your body's static. So in that kind of shot, and transitions from stepping on and off vehicles.
I've seen all the top Steadicam operators in this country come through the ranks. And for me, a good Steadicam operator reaches a point where suddenly it's like they get liberated from the equipment. I think a good Steadicam operator will take, depending on how much Steadicam you do, but it will take them 2 years to 3 years really to reach that point.
And if you don't learn it properly, i.e. you don't do a training course or certainly work with an experienced Steadicam operator, you'll never work it out for yourself, you know. And there were a lot of guys that were, just give it a go, Joes, as we call them, and they were ending up in, shots weren't very good, and they were messing their bodies up as well, and they were just throwing it away and saying, that's impossible thing to use. I kind of learnt the right way. You have to do that. There's no shortcut. You pay your dues with Steadicam. The thing about Steadicam is that it's only effective if the original shot conception is a Steadicam shot, if it's what the Steadicam can do well. A lot of people come to me and say, I want to do a one take. My first thing is like, does the story warrant a one take number at this point? Now just ask yourself, because otherwise it becomes an indulgence on the screen. So don't insult the audience's intelligence by just moving the camera a lot because you've got a Steadicam. When you see a Steadicam shot on the screen, what you don't want is the audience suddenly to go, oh, here's the Steadicam shot. What you want is the audience to be so engaged in the film and the storytelling that you may be halfway through the shot and they go, oh my God, that must be a Steadicam shot. Isn't it amazing?
You're using a tool that in a way is actually traveling with the audience in the thought of what the audience is looking at. Oh, I connect that with that and I connect that with that. You know what I mean? Then it works because you're not aware of the fact that it's a Steadicam shot. If you do a Steadicam shot just because a piece of equipment is there, it sticks out like a sore thumb, you know?
I mean, you do get situations where, because of the failure of the director maybe to do their homework or to properly conceive a scene, it's a lazy option is to get the Steadicam in and let's artificially add dynamism to a shot that really doesn't warrant it in the scene. With experience, and also now working as a main operator, where I have the luxury of being able to say to a DOP or a director, I don't think this is a Steadicam shot. I don't think it's going to work. I don't think I can make it work. And they say, oh, why is that? I said, well, because this and this. It's, it doesn't hold the audience's attention.